Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Hope you have great day
Hi.
so far. Hi. Perfect. So, Josh, if you could follow me, thanks. Great. I hope you all had a great day so far. We are here for the SI Networks learning series starting today, which will go on for next 10 weeks. Today's session is all about introduction to systems thinking, the very first part of the 5 parts that we have within the SI Learning series. Today, your host and facilitator is Joss Colchester and myself, Roma Patadia. Joss is the founder of SI Network, and he's joining us from London. He's also working as an ecosystem builder at the SI Network. And myself, Roma Patadia, I'm joining from Bangalore. I am the program manager and innovation facilitator working with SI for the last 6 months. And feel free to let us know in the chat box where you're joining us from. All right, moving on. This is let us look at the timeline, what the learning series timeline looks like. We have one module dedicated for every 2 weeks. So for this week and the coming week, we will focus on systems innovation. In this session, we'll learn about the principles, and then the next week we will have a learning cohort. So that way, every alternate week we have a learning cohort and the learning and sessions to learn the principles. If you want to learn more about the learning series, you can click on the link over here, and it'll take you to the website. And if you like to read up more about the materials, learn about all these concepts in depth, you could subscribe to some of these material here. You could click here on this button, it'll take you to the website, and you could subscribe to the material and take a look at it. This learning series is also a pathway to certification. If you're interested in getting the level 1 certification for systems innovation, you could read up more about it over here. So yeah, this learning series at the end of it can lead you to getting a certificate if you're able to read all the guides and write all the attend to all the quiz questions and get about 80% of grades. You get a certificate at the end of it. All right, so that's about the learning series. And for today's session, we will look at systems innovation. Again, you could click on here. Most of these resources are hyperlinked, so it'll take you to the website. We're going to learn about systems innovation basics. A little bit about the housekeeping notes. The session will go on for about 90 minutes. It's going to be super interactive. We'll all come on the Miro board at some point and put our ideas on sticky notes. And the session is being recorded. Just in case you missed any part of it, you will find this video on our LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as our website. And the purpose is to learn better about systems innovation principles and get the hands-on experience with tools. And this is going to be a 10-week long journey. This is very special learning series because it happened last year and it's happening now this year. So we might stick to doing it once a year. So if you've been here for the first session, highly recommend that you could attend all the session and understand all the concepts. All right. So time for a little icebreaker. If you check in the chat box, you might find this link to the Miro board, and you can hop on to the Miro board and tell us what got you interested in SI Learning series and what you hope to learn from it. It's really important information for us so that we could try to meet most of the expectations in the room. And if you'd like to connect with each other, if you want to connect with our fellow learners, feel free to share your LinkedIn details here and you could connect with each other. So yeah, time to write some of your answers here in the icebreaker section. Right, so Ali says, found out about SI network, SI from a service design colleague, been interested in systems thinking for the past 8 years since I started working with strategic design consultancies. Awesome. So That's about Ali. And then I heard about SI through Reddit. I was trying to find resources. Amazing, better able to wrestle with AI. And then software developer interested in some of these principles, want to be able to facilitate systems innovation processes as in addition to HCD, perfect. Shifted to systems innovation. I'm part of the Schumacher Institute and have worked. I've dabbled in systems thinking, been curious about systems thinking. A colleague recommended SI network. Wow. So we have participants from different fields, different experience levels, and this is a perfect place for all of us, let me assure. All right. You could keep writing as we move on to the next stage of the workshop. I would like to request Joss to take us through some of the principles of the SI innovation. Over to you, Joss.
Thanks for that, Roma. And just to say, welcome you to drop in your LinkedIn profile here. So this can also be an opportunity for us to connect as we go through the journey in the coming 10 weeks or so. But it is great to get a chance to share with you a bit about systems innovation. This is going to be an introduction, kind of get you from 0 to 1 and set the stage for what follows in the coming weeks. And hopefully by the end of today, you've kind of made sense of what this is about and have a basic understanding of it. So we have quite a bit to cover. I'm going to jump in for the sake of time. There'll be interactivity as we go through. There's going to be like a presentation here, sharing the basics of it. We're going to look at, key principles key principles for what makes a systems innovation with some examples here. And then we're going to talk a bit about some of the different dimensions, the methods for going about and doing this. And that will be today's session. And we have that for 80 minutes or so. So I'm going to jump in here. If you have any questions, we go along, put them in chat room, I'll pick them up, or put them on the sticky board here. Happy to answer them. This is the presentation section, what we hope to cover, talk a bit about the context within which systems innovation exists and why it exists at this time and so forth. We'll talk about these wicked problems. We'll talk about this new approach to addressing complex challenges that systems innovation is, kind of a non-linear approach, and then we'll give some quick examples before moving on. So here we are, top left, and a bit about the context within which systems innovation exists, because it's a relatively new subject or area. And you've probably heard these other words, complexity science or systems change and systems theory. And those stretch back way into the 20th century. So all of this is really based on systems theory and systems thinking, which is now maybe 80 years old. It started developing in the center of the last century after the wars in the 50s and so forth. A lot of ideas around information theory and cybernetics and system science. Later came the science of complexity and chaos theory, network science, and Danella Meadows was a big figure in this field, introducing us to the ideas of systems change and how we go about mapping and trying to influence systems on different levels and how to get high leverage and so forth. And more recently has emerged this idea of systems innovation, maybe just 20 years old or so. And that's, as we'll talk about now, this kind of intersection of innovation and systems thinking and innovation ecosystems and systems thinking to again address these big challenges. So welcome you to take a look into this. We have a list of books on the website, and if you're interested, there's plenty of content out there. Just to say, if we look at this, we can see that systems thinking is a much bigger, well-known area, right? It's been around a lot longer. Many books on that. There's institutions and conferences and all sorts of things. Systems change, a bit more recent, maybe still more popular. You can see systems innovation. So this is N-gram. So how many times did this word appear in a book? in the year 2019. And we can see systems innovation, we call this an emerging field. So it's still relatively small compared to the others, but there's a lot of interest in it. And this is how we break out the ideas, and we'll be, looking at this as we go through the series. This is how we're actually structuring the series, right? Today we're talking about Systems Innovation Center, but 2 weeks we'll be in the modules around systems thinking, and then systems mapping, systems inquiry, transition design, and ecosystem building. And that's kind of how we structure these ideas. There's a lot of ideas here. Systems innovation is quite a complex and challenging endeavor, and we actually need different skills and competencies and ideas to really be successful in this. So we do need to bring in these system thinking ideas. That's all the stuff up here. The complexity science, nonlinear science, network theory, complex adaptive systems. Hopefully you've heard of some of these words. Over here, we'll be coming back to this again in half an hour or so, so not going to dig too much into it. Over here, it's all about understanding systems, the mapping, the modeling, the leverage points, thinking about actors, maybe the iceberg, you've heard about this. Down at the bottom, we're thinking about transition design. So it's another kind of framing for all of this, right? We're obviously talking about a system changing from one state to another or transforming, and that's a transition process. So there's a whole pile of models and ideas around that, from the two loops and multi-level perspective to three horizons and so forth. And all of these ideas and models that help us think about that transition process and design for it, futures and foresight, so on and so forth. And finally, this ecosystem building, which is all about how do we develop this network of actors aligned around addressing a challenge. And yeah, we'll talk all about this as we go through, not to try and jump into too much of it right now, because it's a lot. Yeah, as mentioned, any questions, drop them into the chat and we'll pick them up before. Will the slides be shared? Well, the slides are in the guide. So all of this is based upon the contents in these guides here. So this is this guide, the first one. You'll find it on the website. You'll find it in the Foundations course. So all the slides will be found in that. So just say a word, what is systems innovation? And yeah, we'll stay unpacking that over the next 70 minutes, so you'll have a clearer view by the end. But this is one way of thinking about it, quite a straightforward way. This gentleman called Frank Giels, who's a professor at University of Manchester on systems innovation. Do you want to read this for us, Roma, just so we can maybe all hear it together? I think it's quite a good kind of framing.
Yeah, sure. So Frank Gill says, so what is systems innovation? I'll suggest that it is about changes in the way we fulfill societal functions. So how the society fulfills mobility or energy or food or entertainment or healthcare. So it's about a change in socio-technical systems. It's a shift from one system, from one energy system, from one food system, from one healthcare system to another.
So he's talking about this kind of reorganization of the way a system fulfills its function. And that we kind of call a paradigm shift. So systems are a set of elements that are interrelated in a particular way to perform an overall function. The human body, a bicycle, a house, a football team, a school, whatever it is. And if we take a school, for example, right, its function is, we might say, education. Obviously, there's other purposes to the school. And we have a particular modality, a particular paradigm for thinking about education. It's a contemporary in the modern world. We might say that's kind of an industrial age logic, kind of reductionist logic about how we've divided up into classrooms, and we have teachers and they tell students the curriculum, and we have to sit there and study it and revise it and do exams and so forth. And that pattern of organization as to how that system is organized and works and fulfills its function looks pretty similar if you go from one country to another. And what he's saying is systems innovation is when we don't just replicate or adjust that pattern slightly, like new classes or shorter classes or different way of interacting between students and teacher or different curriculum. It's when we actually step back and we look at the broader pattern, and that's actually changed. So we're going to look at examples. It's like, well, maybe we don't have a teacher at the front of the classroom. Maybe the students are organized, in tables to teach each other, or learn from each other. So that would be a structural change. And that's what he's getting at here. There's whole new ways of fulfilling societal functions. And today we kind of have that possibility with information technology, with changes in societal values, with new ways of thinking, system thinking, and trying to move away from the reductionist paradigm is what kind of allows for this whole conception. Like we weren't even really thinking like this 50 years ago, but now we have this idea of maybe we can do systems changes, these kind of transformational innovations. And that's where systems innovation is coming from. It's kind of looking at the broader landscape. Um, it might be, the energy transition in your country, and it's thinking about changes in the overall patterns of resource flows, changes in the structure of information flows, introduction of new values, change the definition of success. So if you take the energy system, it used to just be about, the price of energy. It used to just be a petroleum-based system. It used to be pretty linear. There are a few large energy companies in your country. It was regulated by the government. We had these kind of linear supply chains from the power stations, through the grid to your house. And we're actually rethinking that whole thing, right? With smart grid, with decentralized grid, with we're thinking about different values now and different factors. We don't just want energy, we want it to be clean, we want it to be working for the environment and all of this. So it's this whole reframing of the system, its purpose, its way of organizing that this grid can be decentralized. It can be me and you could be producing energy. We can be trading it and exchanging it. It doesn't have to be linear. There doesn't have to be just four big energy companies in your country providing all the energy. We could be getting energy from many different sources and exchanging that. And that would be a systems change, because if you step back and look at the broader pattern, it would have changed, and the values to some extent and the thinking about the whole thing and the way it's organized would have changed. And that would be a systems innovation. And that's what we're aiming for here when we talk about systems innovation. It doesn't have to be at this, huge scale of a national energy system. It could be, like a school, could be your neighborhood, it could be your organization, but it kind of exists on many different levels, right? We know these changes need to happen, at many different levels. Okay, so we've got some questions. Robert, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure. So we would like to know, how familiar are you with the topic of systems innovation? If you could follow me on the board. All right, yeah. You could pick one of these dots in the panel and any color is fine. And then place it between very well to nothing on the horizontal bar, yeah. So I can place it here right in between. We have quite a few very well informed participants, and then we also have beginners just.
Bit counterintuitive. We normally put the not so well on the other end, but hopefully we're smart enough to figure all that out. Yeah, we're just testing it, right? Make sure everyone's awake today. Yeah. But a good spread, but looks like there's quite a few who know a bit about this already. So very good. All right, let's stay going. It's a colorful line there, but that was just a bit of an icebreaker in terms of what's all this systems innovation about. Of course, it is about responding to these things we call wicked problems or very complex challenges, like that transition to a new energy architecture would be an example of a wicked complex challenge. Wicked problems. How many people have heard of wicked problems? Maybe put your hand up or put your digital hand up. Yeah, many people. Okay, it's quite a popular concept, right? Essentially, they're very highly complex challenges, but for me, the defining characteristic is that they're systemic, right? It's not one part of the system, not one part of the system. It is the system itself, and it's not even one system. It's like a whole mess of systems, right? Some people call these messes. Um, so this graphic kind of captures it, right? A tame problem is something like changing a light bulb. I think it's a good example of a tame problem. Um, and there's a problem, and there's a solution to that problem. And this framing of problem solution makes sense. And also we can isolate the problem. You just go and switch out the light bulb and you put in a new one, and that's the solution. You fix that problem. Okay, but many problems these days just aren't like that. They're more like this, right? Like corruption, or even water, a water crisis in California might be an example of one of these wicked problems. Any other what are examples? We've actually got a question here. Yeah, maybe here, like what challenge, anything you're working on that we might be able to take as a kind of case study to talk about here. Let's maybe take this question now. Do you have a wicked challenge that you can share with us today? So we've got a kind of real case study. Let's just take 30 seconds.
Uh, just meanwhile, if you could take a few questions from the chat box
Sure.
while we
Yeah.
do this activity. Okay.
Mhm.
So Ilya asks, is this always related to society, or can it be related to entire business industries as well? Take car manufacturers or energy providers, they're facing a paradigm shift as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's all these things. It's social, it's technical, it's environmental, it's cultural, it's business models, it's finance. It's all of these. Yeah. I mean, we know that almost every industry needs to change and transform today.
Right, thanks for that. And Lillian is asking, is it also about political, economical systems, or only socio-technical systems?
Yeah, it's about all of them, really, socio-technical systems. That's Frank Giles. He kind of studies socio-technical systems. So he studied, for example, the advent of the automobile in the United States as a kind of socio-technical system. But no, it relates to all kinds of systems. Yeah, and there's almost always political aspects. There's finance. There's culture and humans. There's behavioral. There's technology and so forth. Okay. Should we take a quick look, Rama? What do you think about these ones?
Sure. Aging society. So one of the answers I see here is aging society. And then we have inequity in access to education,
Yeah.
Iran-US war and oil supplies, waste management. And then we have nutrition, animal oppression, delivery of tech-enabled care, assisted living for best life possible challenge, AI to affect software development processes, how to intervene most effectively with AI in software development,
Mm,
and then homelessness.
yeah. Okay. Maybe move on. But we've got some interesting one. Aging society and assisted living for better living possibilities. I mean, those are good ones. Or even the rise of chronic diseases. Is a wicked challenge. Because it's systemic, right? Aging is not one part of society. It's like the whole of society is getting older, and age affects everything, right? It's not just your diet. It's where you go for exercise. It's how you do your job. It's about employment, and it's economics and finance. Like a whole shift in the demographics like that changes so many different things. So let's just take a look at this. There's different ways of thinking about these wicked challenges. One is around the dimensionality. How many dimensions are there to this problem, right? Like if my bike breaks down, there's a puncture. Well, there's just one dimension. I've just got to fix that puncture. It's not a political problem. It's not a social, cultural problem. It's the bike needs fixing, right? So there's only one dimension. Others have multiple dimensions. Agency is a really important part of this. How many actors are there involved in this scenario? Is there someone who controls this thing, right? So my bicycle, there's certainly someone who controls that. So that makes it very easy. I don't have to go and discuss this problem with a whole pile of other people and get their buy-in. And particularly, I don't have to discuss with a whole pile of other people who have very different opinions and very different incentives to do something very different to me, right? This is a simple problem we're dealing with here. But if we take ecosystem degradation, we know in Brazil we've got a lot of farmers who want to go on, chopping down forests and producing meat for the global economy. And a whole pile of people in another part of the world who don't want that, and many of us who don't want that. And there's a whole pile of different actors here, a whole pile of different incentives, a whole pile of different paradigms, right? They're looking at this differently, but we're all in this together, right? We can't ignore each other because we're ultimately all affected by the global ecosystem. So we got a lot of actors there. That's going to get pretty wicked, and it's multidimensional, right? It's environmental, it's social, it's economic, it's definitely political, so on and so forth. Many others up here, right? Global governance, cybersecurity for sure. Political polarization and paralysis is a huge one. Corruption is a good example. Even conflict zones and conflict resolution. So just give you an idea of some of those. The key factor is that they're systemic, which means you can't separate out the problem from the rest of the system. Right. So a light bulb, our puncher, we just go and fix it. Very simple. The light bulb, broken light bulb, is not a problem with the energy system. We don't have to go and change the entire energy system. We don't have to go and talk to all the actors and get everyone buy-in and all of that to fix the light bulb. We just have to fix it. But if you want to transition to, net zero energy system, or even an equitable energy access for everyone, that's a lot of different people. You're going to have to make a lot of different changes. It's actually systemic, and it's not just the energy system. It is about it feeds into the political system. It feeds into environmental and many other systems, so that when you pull on that part, you actually find it's interconnected and you're interacting with many other systems, and you can't just fix that part. Can't just isolate it and go and fix it like our normal approaches lead us to try and do. We need to actually work with the broader system and try and change that broader system. Okay. These are some of the characteristics, kind of manifestations, these big problems, multidimensional, interconnected, open-ended, they're unstructured, multiple perspectives. There's no known solution. Often you've never been there before, like climate change. But the core of it is this complexity, right? And it's not really like an outcome we can just change, which we often try to do with linear approaches. It's actually we've got to dig into all this complexity. And that's what systems innovation is encouraging us to do, and systems thinking, and saying, okay, let's stop trying to fix this part. Because that part is emerging out of a bigger system. And we need to look at that bigger system and step back, right? So not just try and let's just get a little problem, a little dot down here, right? Let's not just say, oh, our water crisis is just a water problem and we can go and fix that. No, like in South Africa, it's a corruption and energy and political and so many other things, and segregation and racism and all of this, so you actually have to dig into that. And that's the nature of wicked problems, and we need to find new ways of approaching that and actually changing the system instead of trying to change the parts. But unfortunately, we find ourselves very much in this paradigm of linear thinking, where we think this problem solution framing that works well for simpler systems will service in this more complex environment, and it really doesn't. We go on kind of trying to fix things. Sometimes we make a bit of progress on that, but that is not sustainable. And we're still in this world of big messy systems that we need to understand. We need to figure out how to work together to shift and change them. And that's kind of where we are, I'd say, in the 21st century. We obviously haven't built this capacity. We need to learn this stuff, both how to understand complex systems, but then how to work in new ways through networks, through collaboration, to actually start to change them and kind of move away from this sort of problem framing solution that's not really serving us well in that environment. And yeah, that's a little bit about, the nature of wicked problems and why we need actual systems change instead of parts change. And that's really setting up the whole need for what we're doing here. And it's complex and difficult and messy and longer time horizons, right? This work happens over 5, 10, 20 years, So it's no surprise that we've kind of tried everything else except for this, but the simpler approaches are not working for us in this stage. So, any questions before we move on about any of this? You could even unmute yourself if you wanted to, or in the chat. I'm not sure. Hopefully, this is all making sense. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing so far? You can put it into the chat. Are we all following along fine with everything, or am I losing you anywhere? Okay, great. Very good. 10 out of 10. Excellent. We have a quick question that we remember also. Yeah.
Would it be possible to send a link for the meter board again? So that's the only question we have right now. I'll share it.
That one there. Yeah. Um, okay. So we're on the same page. We're moving forwards. Very good. And we're pretty good for time. So essentially for me, the core message here, and hopefully you take it away, is that simpler problems, they can be isolated and analyzed. And then you can go and plan out a solution to that problem and roll out that plan, execute on it, fix the problem, and you're done. And yeah, as we talked about, some problems fit into that bucket. The nature of these wicked ones is actually that they're interconnected and they're systemic. They're not apart. So if you try and go and do all that stuff, you might get short-term results, but at the end of the day, the system will go back doing what it does. And because of that, if you actually want to make meaningful, purposeful influence in the world and try and guide systems in a more productive, sustainable kind of direction where we'd like them to go, we actually need to step back and say, wait a sec, we need to look at a system and this set of interrelated systems and think about how we can change that system. And clearly, when you do that, no one actor is going to be doing that, right? I can change my light bulb here, but again, I can't change the whole energy system in Spain or wherever it is. So I need to go about with multiple other actors here. It's complex, it's messy. I'm going to have to spend a lot of time trying to understand this system and what's going on here. So it's going to be quite challenging work, but it's important work that we are doing because it's really the pathway to enabling systemic change that we need. Okay, alrighty. So we talked about the broader context, what systems innovation is. We talked about wicked problems and this need for systems change. And down here, we're going to talk about this new approach that's called systems innovation. At the core of it is this idea of kind of non-linearity. And that's a pretty a little bit scary word if you're not familiar with it. So let's dig into it. Um, Maybe you've heard of the iceberg, and you've heard that at the top of the iceberg are the outcomes, the things that we see, the outcomes of systems. The price of oil just went up because there's a war in the Middle East, or traffic's disrupted, or whatever it is. And those are the outcome from the systems. But behind all of that is a system, right? The war in the Middle East is about a political system behind that, and a socio-cultural system, and so forth. And behind the traffic jam on your way to work was, of course, the whole transport system in your city and the way it's set up to have people take automobiles to work and the structure of that system that leads to them all getting in a traffic jam. So again, it's another way of talking about what we said before, that when we address challenges up here, we take this problem solution framing, we call that a linear approach, right? And it's very intuitive to us. It's deeply ingrained in us because it works well for simpler problems. And it's difficult to get away from it. We've really got to unpack our thinking if we want to try and shift to a different way of thinking. And that different way of thinking we would call non-linear. And non-linear approaches are actually very counterintuitive to us. So it really takes effort for us to learn and to think like this. but it's a different way that looks at the actual system. And a system is not a thing, it's a nexus of many things interacting. And you have to look at what emerges out of all these different things interacting in a particular way, in a particular context. And that's your problem, right? It's what emerges out of this dysfunctional system. The way all these parts are interacting, they're creating negative synergies. They're not working together very well, and they're creating the emergence of this dysfunctional outcome. That's our problem, what we normally call a problem. But problems don't really exist in this kind of language. It's more about challenges. So we're trying to shift to this seeing systems, looking at these networks and how things emerge out of the structure and setup of that overall network. And that's a more nonlinear way of thinking because it's at the nexus of many interacting things rather than just being one thing, a problem that we can go to solve. Hopefully that makes sense to you. But this graphic is one way of putting it that emphasizes that this aspect of growing new systems is what we're doing here. And I think this is a really important one. Ilya, did you want to share anything? Maybe you could speak it out if you have something to share with us.
Oh, hello. Yeah, do you hear me correctly?
Yep.
Okay. Now, sometimes in workshop we use, instead of paradigms, we use mental models because we're discussing, for instance, tourism in a heavy tourism in the city. And then at the iceberg below, we use the mental models of people, basically the citizens and the tourist. And it also is very, yeah, informative, but it gives us a very good, I would say, indication of how hard it is to change the system, actually.
Mm.
How deep it is ingrained, I would say, some behavior. If it really is ingrained in our belief systems, then it's very difficult to takes long basically to change.
Mm.
Is that something that resonates with you? Is that sort of
Oh yeah.
similar to the paradigm, or do I
Yeah.
read it the wrong way? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so paradigm means a few things in the English language actually, but one of the interpretations is really a pattern of thinking, of thought. I mean, the paradigm is
Yeah.
like a pattern of organization, but it can mean a pattern of thinking or a pattern of way people organize. But we do use it to mean, yes, a way of thinking. So that's very true. And yes, that's a strong emphasis in the whole world of systems thinking, systems change, that what we see ultimately emerges out of our thinking. And we'll talk about this in 2 weeks. We talk about systems thinking. And that if it's systemic, if it's a fundamental thing, then yes, we need to change our way of thinking. We need to go back to the source and unpack that because we're typically creating our own problems from our way of thinking and way of behavior. We really need to go back to that. Mike?
Yeah, one kind of question I have, some of it's come up for me, I've read quite a bit about systems thinking over the years. It is certain systems, the emergence which is happening from systems is actually benefiting certain people. Um, Even though that the system might not be benefiting, or we might see it as being not working, but it is working for some people. Lots of systems are working very well for a particularly small amount of very rich and powerful people. And the question that I've been struggling with a bit is kind of like ha we as having agency in terms of changing systems, and then you like so you can impact on a system to get it to try and move in a different direction. But do you believe that like systems kind of have their own kind of dynamic,
Yeah.
almost like which is as a form of emergence is separate from
Yeah.
the individuals within it? Because it's kind
Yeah.
of quite anti-humanist, if that makes
Yeah.
humanist being the
Mm.
human being is no longer
Yeah.
central. The system is
Mm.
the central thing. It's like
Yeah.
a I kind of think of it as a bit like like it's like the air around us. We don't see
Yeah.
it, but we all breathe it in because we need it,
Yep.
but we don't. Yeah. What's your kind of
Yeah.
thoughts on the
Yeah.
power systems have?
There's a lot there, Mike, that we'll cover as we go through. But yeah, system is a set of elements and interrelationships between it, right? So yes, systems create their own behavior, their own dynamics, right? An institution, a social institution, is a pattern of organization that persists beyond the individuals, right? The Central Bank of England has been there through many human beings, right? Perpetuating that pattern. And the financial system in London, people get up every day and they recreate that same pattern of organization. And 50 years later, those people won't be there, neither will. But there's still elements. They're still there. They still need the system. Still needs them, right? So it's not one or the other. It's both. We create those patterns. We create those institutions, and they shape us. But then we shape them, and we can change those institutions, like our political regimes, right? When they don't work, we see the fall of dictatorships and so forth. So it's not one or the other. It's both, in fact, and it's in a constant kind of feedback loop. Um, but we'll get to maybe more of that as we go through, Mike. So thanks for your question. Um, so just coming to this, a really important aspect of this is this idea of growing new systems. So typically, when we're operating at the top of the iceberg here, which most institutions are, they're set up, most organizations are set up within a particular context, right? They've existed and they're normalized. They're set up, like the Central Bank of England was set up in a particular context a long time ago, and it's doing what it does within the nation state framework and so forth. And when it thinks about change, it thinks within that paradigm, right? When the CEO of the central bank shows up every day, he thinks within that paradigm. And so do the CEOs of boards, and so do most people in organizations have to actually survive and move forwards and develop that organization, and that's the way the world works, right? So when they think about change, they normally take a reference point as the current system or the past, and they project that onto the future. They don't really question the actual infrastructure and the protocols and the institution itself. So we end up getting this linear kind of change. It's about changing outcomes, right? We want better, whatever it is. We want to reduce CO2 by 2030. We want to, give better access to these people to school or whatever. So we get a lot of these goals and plans towards those goals. We see a lot of those around here. But that's not really how you transform the system, because it's really still operating in the same paradigm. You've got to go down here, as we talked about there, the mental models. You've got to unpack the mental models, think about systemic structures, and re-explore those and say, how's this system emerging out of these mental models and systemic structures? How do we need to change them? And how can we grow a new system based upon a new set of values and a new way of organizing that will most definitely take time, because growing anything takes time. But ultimately, if we can iterate, if we can grow, if we can develop and maintain those principles as we go through that, this new set of principles, new set of values, new way of looking at the world, new way of relating to each other, we can ultimately potentially build something that's adapted to the new context and disrupt the incumbent and create a new system. And that is the job of systems innovation, right? It's not an easy job. Because we know there's a whole part of power dynamics you talked about, Mike, and there's all sorts of challenges, as you can imagine, right? But the key takeaway here is that it is this process of fundamentally re-questioning the basic values and mental models and structure, and trying to grow something new from that, rather than just operating within the current kind of principles and so forth and improving those. So it's transformational in that sense. And it is a long-term initiative. Growing anything takes time. A lot of experimentation, there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of mistakes, a lot of learning. A lot of learning has to go on here to be able to develop and grow this. It's building in relationships, right? These are new ways of thinking, new ideas, but they're also new ways of relating between people and new networks forming, and ultimately new institutions forming that are, as Frank Giels said back there, it's a new way of operating, right? This way of doing finance here, we see a decentralized financial system potentially coming. That's very different from the one we know at the moment, the way we do finance in the UK as a central bank and the nation state. And we give them our money, the banks, and they manage the whole system, really. A decentralized world, we might have our own tokens and we might store them in our wallets on a blockchain that no bank owns and no nation state really owns, right? So that could be potentially very different. Of course, it can be co-opted by the existing system. We'll get all sorts of things happening in the world. We see those, but we also know there's the potential for a totally different financial system that could benefit, society in massively in so many different ways. Those are the kind of transformational changes we're talking about here. And the key point is this non-linearity. And by non-linearity, we mean it's a type of change that is not planned. We're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And then, by 2025, we'll be here. No, we're past 2025. By 2027, we're going to be here. 2030, we're going to be here. And 2035, we're going to be here, right? That's planning. It's also implicit in that is that we can predict and control the system, which is not always the case with a complex system, often not the case. Whereas here, this nonlinear approach, we're saying actually we need to grow something new. And that's not something we plan, it's emergence. And emergence is very different from planning. It's a process of bringing the right pieces together in the right way and connecting them and seeing what happens when you put them together. Like maybe having a children's party, and if you put the children in the right context, they might have a great fun party, and them having fun is the emergent phenomena of them all interacting and having a good time. And there can be some planning in that, but trying to tell the children exactly what to do is not a good idea. So we need to think a little bit differently about how we approach change when we're dealing with complex adaptive systems. We'll talk a lot about that as we go through the series. Hopefully this idea is coming through to you. One important aspect of it is that this idea of dissolving problems instead of solving them, which is quite interesting. Russell Ackoff talks about this. This problem solution framing is just super counterintuitive to us, right? As soon as we get beyond 5 years old or something, we've kind of learned this idea that if I have a problem, there's maybe a solution to it. And we start to frame things in that way. Russell Ackoff is saying we have something very complex, wicked challenge. You can't really solve it. What you can do is dissolve it. And dissolving it is changing the context, the system out of which it emerges, and influencing, guiding that. I mean, Mike, you were saying that systems are changing all the time around us, and that's totally true, right? It's quite egoistic to come in and say, oh, I'm going to change the system as if it's not changing before I showed up. Of course it is, but we can guide it and influence it to a different modality so that the problem no longer emerges in the same way, and thus we dissolve the problem instead of solving it. So that's lots of talking and presenting. Hopefully you're still with me. Maybe we jump into a question here, Roma.
Sure. Yeah, we have actually two questions. We do both of them, Joss?
Yep.
Okay, so the first question, we could do it simultaneously, I think. The first question is, how would you describe nonlinear change in your own words, now that we have heard about it? And the second question is, how do you see the practices of systems innovation being useful in your work or project? So take some time and gather here. You could follow me on the board.
Yeah, we can start with the first one here.
We have one answer already. One solution triggers a problem in a related space, I think. And then there's no right answer. All right. And then exponential network. We have systems, living or non-living, resist updating their models of the world until the mismatch with reality. That's one answer. And then an independence of possibilities. Okay. Sometimes forward progress takes a step backward as other parts of the system catches up. Considering the interactions of variables when implementing an intervention. And then from transactional to contextual, situational outcomes. Yeah, these are all great answers. And we could also write down our answers in the second question. How do you see the practice of systems innovation being useful in your work or project? So some of the answers here in the second question, which is how do you see the practices of systems innovation being useful in your work or project, is understand stakeholders better and engage with them for collaborative solutions. Yes. And then better understanding of the connectedness of things. All right. And then a more holistic way of thinking in understanding interconnectedness. And then we have visualizing the interconnectedness of departments and tasks. Like visualization is an important part of systems innovation work, I think. And then transparent methods, tools to work with others. And then defining a wicked problem, example one, health, people health, and planet health. Assessing the impact of possibilities on the interconnectedness. Wow, these are some amazing answers here. Understanding the barriers to adopting new technology and working practices. We have another answer, holistic lens to really understand the context. And then SI helps design better policy mixes and understand interaction.
Should we move on,
Yeah.
Romet? Thanks very much for your input there. Yeah, so I mean, just quickly before we move on here, different ways of thinking about systems innovation. This is one of them. It's systems and it's innovation taken literally, and the innovation, we hear a lot about that, but it's a lot of innovation in parts or reductionist kind of thinking, based upon reductionist thinking. It's often based upon scientific knowledge, which is fine, but that knowledge is often quite reductionist. It's coming out of research institutes and so forth, and then we convert that into new solutions, new products, services, new technologies, and we create a business and we take that to market, and in so doing we innovate and change practices, behaviors, and ways of working. And innovation is become a dominant modality in certain economies in the world, so it's risen hugely. But we also recognize that kind of innovation, a new app, mobile phone, electric car, whatever it is not necessarily getting us to where we want to go. And an interesting aspect of innovation in parts is that it leaves the status quo in the system unchecked, unchanged. It doesn't question the way the system's really working, or its values, or its structure, or its mental models, or anything. So it provides us a lot of good products and services, but it doesn't really change systems. So what we're saying is we need something different, and we need to go back all the way back here to the thinking and change that from the reductionist kind of paradigm that we know so well. We'll talk a lot about this next week when we talk about systems thinking, but we need to change this to a systems paradigm. And that gives us a fresh way of looking at the world, helping us better understand systems and the relationships, not just the parts, and the network of relationships, and then to innovate in that broader context, in those relationships, in those mental models. It also helps us understand that, and the patterns of organization and so forth. And from that, actually start thinking about changing and reorganizing and growing new systems. So that's what we mean. One way of looking at systems innovation by focusing on the innovation aspect and how it differs from, traditional, what I call it, innovation as usual, because we have a lot of that. But can we actually build upon that innovation that's become so prominent in our world, these innovation ecosystems? Can we actually align and integrate that energy, so much energy and resources and massive amounts of money, as we know, right? Is there a way to actually start channeling that into broader influencing systems or aligning that towards systems change, something more than the sum of its parts? Because at the moment we seem very stuck in this modality of creating more products and services and technology that isn't necessarily serving us well when it comes to the kind of changes we need to make in the world. So that there was all about non-linearity, and all of this is in the guide, so I welcome you to dig into that if you want to learn more about it. Finding a few examples here. These are generic ones. We'll look at some specific ones in a moment. So I talked about energy grid. Imagine we shifted from, well, an innovation in parts, right, would be a new solar panel or battery, but it leaves the energy architecture similar. A systems innovation would be actually how do we change from that linear grid to a non-linear network smart grid that's adaptive. We're able to transact energy and money peer-to-peer, buying and selling energy, and creating our own cooperatives or systems of energy exchange. We know some villages and communities have done that. Could we do that at a larger scale? That would transform our whole paradigm, right, of energy. Education, you mentioned this one, right? We have innovation there. It often looks like children holding an iPad or something like this, or maybe a new curriculum or whatever it is. Systems innovation, again, it would look quite different. Could we get away from this teacher-driven content consumption kind of paradigm, and this batch kind of learning based upon your age and the industrial age kind of production line to the whole thing, and change that kind of structure where maybe students are able to teach each other or co-learn and have different patterns within the classroom, and even maybe contribute or question the content and so forth. So that might be a change in education or a systems change. Manufacturing, we know like how we do that. Most of our products come from large factories in other parts of the world where it's very centralized, long production chains with resources taken from all over the planet. It's served us well in terms of producing a lot of things we like at very cheap prices. We also know there's problems with it in terms of all the waste we produce, but also it really disempowers us in terms of centralizing production in other parts of the world, and we don't make anything. Could distributed manufacturing, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, things like this, where we're able to produce our own goods and exchange and transact them and recycle them and create them and recreate them, that could change the whole kind of supply chain and whole manufacturing system and the way we get our goods and create them, and our relationship to those goods would actually change also if we were making them. So that would be a systems change. These are just general ones. Yeah, we talked about the finance as an example there, shifting from the model we know that actually concentrates power massively, right? We give all our money to banks to hold that. Is there a more decentralized way of doing that? We know technology, distributed ledger technology, and token economics and so forth are coming. There's a lot of potential in that to really think about a different architecture to the financial system, particularly in the age of the internet when we are able to transact money information so easily. We could also transact value and exchange it peer to peer. Okay, so those were quick examples. Maybe I'll move on, Roma, just to stay on time. Let's maybe distill some principles here around what makes for a systems innovation. And then some quick, more concrete examples. And I won't go into too much, but I put up 4 things here. There needs to be some awareness around the system. Same old thinking, same old results. So we've talked about shifting from a reductionist paradigm to a more systems paradigm. So that's pretty key. We do need to change the underlying thinking. Otherwise, we are going to converge back to kind of linear thinking, and it will start to look pretty similar to what we have or what we've done in the past, even if it has new fancy technology on it, or we've renamed it or whatever. So it's a different level of awareness, you might say, to some extent. We need a better awareness around systems, and this initiative, whatever we're doing, needs to be in some sense raising awareness around the system, or based upon a new level of awareness. Not just a few people having that awareness, but it needs to be spread generally throughout the system to some extent. We talked about structural changes. It needs to change the structure of the system. If you're leaving that unchecked, then you're unlikely to change the system. This is the way information and resources and physical goods and transport, all these things flow within a system, is a core part of how that system works and the outcomes you get. And we need to look at that, and that systemic change will almost always, you'll see it maybe in the examples, it changes the structure of the system to realize new outcomes, new ways of doing things, as Frank Gills was talking about back there. It's transformative, it's not incremental. So it's to say you can't get to where you want to go just with the finite set of steps based upon what you have in your current way of thinking. You actually need to transform, and you need to kind of work with the transformative process. Something needs to die and something else needs to be born. And there's a dynamic relationship between them. We'll be talking about that in transition design when we get there. And it, to some extent, needs to be co-created. It can't be driven by a centralized entity and a solution delivered to others. It needs to be creating space, creating context for actors to co-create this new paradigm. That's the only way. You can't change the system. Systems change themselves. And by systems change itself, we mean the people in that system are going to change it themselves. But we can facilitate, we can support them, but it needs to be co-created in that respect. So there's some characteristics. Maybe it's not complete, but it's just to give you an idea. And going to briefly look at some examples down here before asking you which of those characteristics, or maybe others, do you see represented in this example? Yep, Anna.
Hi there, it's Ana Luisa. So do you think, and maybe it is simplistic, but it helps to have one ingredient already for 3 of the 4 components or the characteristics, the awareness, what else did you say? Structural and co-created, having multi-stakeholder groups of people sitting around, like aging population or vaccination for aging population, which is an example of a problem here in Belgium. And sitting people from pharma, the health insurance, patient organizations, doctors, hospitals, etc., actually brought all of the people that are concerned with the problem and have known the problem. And for the first time, they all, with their perspective, came up with a solution together. So there was awareness that this is a systemic problem, although we already know it. There was a structure to the definition of the problem. It's not just the hospitals or the patients or the insurance companies or pharma that are actually looking at it, but each one of them looks at it from their own perspective, and sitting around and putting them facing the same problem, but understanding that others have a different view, they actually co-created a solution. Do you think that having multi-stakeholder uh, work is a good ingredient that will.
Yeah. I mean, it's a core ingredient. It almost always needs to be co-created in that sense. And the work of going about doing this is the work of creating those spaces to bring those people together and that structure to help them go through that, right? To negotiate their meanings, to make sense together of the system and how they can work together in doing things differently. So that is the work that we're doing, really. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's stay going. Thanks for sharing that, Anne-Louise. So some examples, and as I say, I'm going to ask you quickly at the end, which aspects of the above or other aspects of systems thinking, systems innovation do you think this might represent? We have 3 examples. So first one is violent crime in the city of Glasgow, which is a city in Scotland, and it had a long history of violent crime, almost 100 years, unfortunately, of serious knife crimes, battles between young men from rival gangs, and it was #1 most dangerous city in Europe to live in until quite recently. And in 2005, senior police officer McCluskey and the Glasgow police set up a violence reduction unit. And the first step in this journey, well, there are many steps in this journey which the units took in changing the dynamic, but they started by reframing the challenge in a different way. So we know generally how we think about crime across the world, different law enforcement agencies. It's kind of a linear model, right? There's a perpetrator of a crime, and that's the problem, that person, and we need to go and fix them, which means going and catching them and arresting them and punishing them and putting them into jail. And that's a linear way of thinking. Well, that obviously wasn't working here. They've been doing that for a long time. It's not working in some contexts it may work, other contexts it doesn't. Certainly in this context, it wasn't working. So she drew upon her original training as a nurse to see violence as if it were a disease, a pandemic, which spread, which needed tackling like a public health emergency. Rather than responding to incidents once they've happened, the city needed to prevent the spread of violence in the first place. So start to see it differently, right? Start to see it not necessarily as an individual problem. We need to fix this problem, but as a spreading, as a culture, as something, as a network of interacting things and a culture that's perpetuating itself amongst young men and gangs that is, of course, perpetuating itself through the relationships between these people. And that was the reframing of it. From this perspective, the epidemic was the product of a shared culture of men and communities entrenched by economic inequalities and domestic violence, drugs, and worklessness. The shift in perspective to see Glasgow's challenge as a disease of epidemic proportion enabled McCluskey to show that the problem was deep-rooted and would only be addressed with a collective and systemic response. She had to change the city's culture, and to do it not from within the police force alone. They formed a network with many partners in health, education, housing, employment, family support services, as well as local churches, businesses, and community groups. Which is interesting because this approach, this linear approach, thinks of it as a law enforcement problem. It's a police problem. It's a crime problem. And it's their job to fix it. And it's not got much to do with other things. But here she's saying it's a kind of an ecosystem problem. It's emerging out of this ecosystem of different factors that these young men find themselves in, from employment and job, whatever it is, the culture and so forth, family and history. So it's going to take an ecosystem to address it. So she can't fix it from within her institution. They need to work with all these other people, and they need to not take this, we're going to deliver a service, which is trying to fix this problem. We're going to work in an ecosystem with all these other people, housing, education, employment, to start to try and shift this system. Together, they created more effective ways to intervene early, working with families to prevent young men being drawn into a culture of violence, and then to provide them with more attractive alternatives, education, training, and employment, and so forth. And it's been very successful, actually, as an initiative. Crime has significantly come down in Glasgow, and it's being replicated across the UK, here and there in London and other parts, as an effective approach. So that's a very, very brief case study. You're about to find more, in the guides and so forth. Love to hear any ideas you have about that. How do you feel? Is that an example of a systems innovation or a systems change? In what way? Let's just take a minute to think about it, or 2 minutes, and post up any ideas we have here, please. Yeah, Karen?
Yeah, so Josh, not to make it a reductionist approach, but very simple question. Other than natural ecosystems, all other ecosystems are guided by people, right? So is it that systems innovation boils down to, and again, as I said, please, I'm not trying to take a reductionist approach, but is it that all system innovation is finally dependent on how actors decide to change the system? And therefore, the interaction between them is really what finally will lead to newer ways.
Good question. But I think there's a few things in that, One is, the extent to which we can say we're going to change the system and then change it, right? We're kind of assuming this linear causality, which is obviously limited. So I think what we can say is that with a given level of awareness and intentionality and work, we can potentially guide a system, right? Because we know it's going to change. It's just where's it going and how might we guide it? So I think that's what we can do, Karen. We can bring people together and we can work on that. We can't necessarily say we're going to change it. You've got to be careful with all that. We're going to make the system do this or that and so on and so forth, because when you really start to grasp that reality of this thing is a complex adaptive system, you start to see that it has its own life and we have to work with it and we can't just impose order on it. So I think we can come together and say, we want to try and influence the future directory of this system in a beneficial, what we believe is a beneficial way. And to do that, we're going to have to learn about it and we're going to have to work together. I think these are the things we can do. There's so many things we can't do that we think we can do, right? So I would say, yeah, of course, being humble in all of this is very important, because often we're not humble, So starting from a place of humility and recognition of our limitations, and that these things exist and they're evolving themselves, and we have that potential to guide them if we have the awareness and so forth.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great way of putting it. Thank you. Yes.
I mean, if you have children or something, you'll know about this, right? If you had 3 children or a children's party or something, yeah. Okay. Let's Ramesh, take a quick look at some of these and then move on.
Sure, Josh. So for the question, which of the aspects above do you think this example best represents and why? We have few answers. First one is a structural approach, as it analyzes the ecosystem to come up with a solution. And then co-created solution or effort. And then we have ecosystem. It required a structure and a container for co-creation, as well. All was only possible because of awareness from the nurse in seeing the problem as a health problem. And then move away from individual blame.
Just to say, that awareness also had to, it couldn't just be her, could it? She had to share that awareness. Other people had to see it in that way too, or else they weren't going to buy into this, right? So yeah. Sorry, figure.
Who created multiple community groups or organizations involved, not only police and justice. This one's interesting. And then transformative perspective from crime to health. And then we
Yeah,
have more
so
people.
that's a reframing, isn't it? Think of it very, very differently. Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, that's it for now, Josh. We have
Okay,
more people
sure.
writing in.
Yep, let's stay going. Yeah, we just have 15 minutes. I kind of skip ahead with a few things here, so we're still on track. Maybe we'll just take one more example here and you can read over the others yourself. So here's another one. This one's focusing more on structural change. I gave you the answer up front, so you don't have to do all this work. So it's the idea of the 15-minute city, and it was introduced originally by Deputy Mayor of Paris, and it's since a concept that's caught on in other areas and other cities, and it's really the idea of, in some way, restructuring or changing the city so that you could have everything you need in terms of services and all the things you need, food and transport and healthcare and education within 15 minutes walk from your home. And it's a very different paradigm, very different way of organizing a city compared to what we did in the 20th century. We separated things out, and most of us who live in cities, we find ourselves further than 15 minutes from the things we want to get to. So we have to take cars or other modes of transport. Communities become more fragmented. We have very specialized areas like business districts and commercial centers and so forth. That kind of creates this mass production kind of mentality and modality, whereas this 15-minute city is trying to reverse a lot of that in terms of integrate things instead of differentiate them and bring them all back to the kind of human scale and the walkable scale, and kind of a more human-centered kind of approach. And would change a lot of things. It could not just influence trying to address, things like CO2 emissions so that people aren't driving so much, but it could influence, social factors in terms of creating a stronger sense of community and commercial factors, now you have markets and so forth. So it's an example of a different way of thinking about a city and a different way of organizing a city, and some cities have started to introduce it with different effects. So that's just another example of what we mean by a systems change, right? A lot of our cities look like this, the very opposite of that, and that was based upon a paradigm of reductionism that kind of took us down that pathway until we end up in suburbia. We've got to drive half an hour to get anywhere, really. And this is instead of differentiating, it's trying to reintegrate, which is a different kind of paradigm way of thinking. So that's one. Another here is Climate Kick, really interesting case study, an organization that works on systems innovation around addressing climate change, particularly in Europe, and convenes many actors, institutions, and so forth around these challenges, and explicitly takes a systems innovation approach. Not going to stop on these now because we're a bit short on time. The final thing I want to share with you is a little bit about kind of methodology and what we need to, the different dimensions we need to look at and approach as we do this work. We kind of touched upon some of them. There's different methodologies and different approaches. So this is just the framing that we use at SI. I showed you it at the beginning. It looks pretty similar to many others, so there's not massive variety. And it's really about how you would go about doing this work in some sense. It's not a 4 steps kind of process because it's a lot more complex than that, but it's really the things you need to consider and the different methods and tools you need to bring into focus. So the first one we talked about was framing, right? Shifting away from linear thinking to systems thinking in some sense, helping people make that shift. The mapping, which is about trying to understand this system, map out the different elements into relationships, and think about the intervention points. Where are you going to intervene in that system? And then think about the interventions you want to introduce there, the things you want to design and develop at those intervention points. An important aspect here is that it's a number of different interventions. It's not just one. You can't change the system by changing one part of it. You need to understand it, map it out, find these high leverage places, and then design interventions at those different places. and ultimately try and put those together into a portfolio or an initiative or an ecosystem that's working together around this challenge, right? So if we took something like, well, if we took the example we saw there in Scotland, in Glasgow, she didn't just try and put the people in jail, right? Change one part of the system. She looked at the different factors, thought about the different factors, education, housing, so on, employment. We heard that. And then what am I going to do there? I'm going to have to work with these people to bring a new way of doing housing here and a new way of doing employment, a new way of doing education and so forth for these people. And at those multiple intervention points, growing new initiatives, connecting those into an ecosystem and working iteratively over a period of time, you can start to shift that system. So those are some of the key kind of dimensions. We'll be discussing them as we go forth. It's the four main modules that we'll be working on in the coming 10 weeks. Wanted to leave a little bit of time for you to think about that. Also, this little canvas here has those four dimensions: systems thinking up here, mapping, ideating on new innovations, and developing an ecosystem. We have some questions. Why do you think we need to be thinking in systems? Why do we need to be mapping the system out? Let's just take maybe 4 minutes. I'll put it on the timer to have you think about these things and post up ideas. So you can post up, all or any of them. Take a look at the question, have a think about it. Why do we need to be designing for transitions? Why do we need to be iteratively, taking this ecosystem approach? Let's take 4 minutes on the timer and we'll come back and take a look. Okay, should we maybe take a look here, Rama? Just share any ideas?
Sure, Josh. So starting with the top left explore section, why do you think we need explore the challenge and reframe it with systems thinking? So we have interesting answers here to address the complex nature of the interrelated problems, and then avoid tunnel vision and exclusion. Then we have complex problems require understanding the whole system. Locating different perspectives is only possible when you iterate a problem. And then to understand where to put effort to move system in the right direction, find leverage points and focus on the effective policies. Moving on to why do you think we need to map the system and find high leverage places to intervene? It is for the answers are creating awareness of the system at work. And then in order to understand all the connections and interconnections between all the parts, and then small interventions in key places can create large system changes. And then elbow, wrist, hand recognition of connectedness. That's a great metaphor there. To visualize the interconnectivity and relationship between different parts. In order to make sense, you need to map sense. Interesting. I would like to add to that for communication and alignment with different stakeholders, mapping really helps. So the third question is, why do we need to design for transition? Some of the answers are the best ideas fall flat with poor implementation. All right. And then change is the only real thing. And then if we do understand the levers, steps, we are reckless. I think that's still being written. And the last question is, why do we need to iteratively grow new initiatives into an ecosystem? So we have some answers. The context is always changing and the things need to take seed, not to be constructed. And then for feedback, people need room, time, mental space to change. Yes. And then throw it out and start again, ignores current reality and thinking. And then to assess the overall outcomes as synergy. So many interventions need to be tested, adjusted to arrive at the desired outcome.
Great. That's a great idea. So I like this one. Excellent. Thank you for your contribution. We're going to draw to a close just to recap a little bit what we covered today. So we're talking about systems innovation, starting right at the beginning. Very high level overview. We'll be unpacking all of this as we go through in the coming weeks. It's this change in a system, as Frank Gill said, a shift from one way of organizing, one way of thinking about one set of values that underpins a system to a new set of values and structure out of which a new way of working can emerge in the system. It's there to really help us address systemic wicked challenges, these complex challenges that don't really fit into this problem solution framing like the simple ones. It's these messy, interconnected systemic ones where we have to actually change the system. We have to embrace that complexity and learn how to go down to the bottom of the iceberg and think about what are the principles underpinning this, the thinking and structure, and start to unpack that, deconstruct it, find new ways to reconstruct it. And from that reconstructing, start to grow a new system, a new way of thinking, a new way of organizing, and ultimately new outcomes. And that's a nonlinear process of change, doesn't fit nicely into our planning processes. It's about dissolving instead of solving problems. And then we looked at examples. Hopefully that brought it alive for you a little bit. The Glasgow violent crime, the 15-minute city. I encourage you to look into Climate Kick, quite an interesting organization working on this. It will show you what that looks like. If you just search for them, you'll find a lot about them. And ultimately a little bit about the methods. Not the only method, but one way of approaching this, framing, mapping, transition design, leading to ecosystem building as a way of going about this. And we will be covering that stuff in the coming weeks. And you'll find a lot more tools and so forth on the website at SI. So, Roma, I'll leave you all there for now. Thanks a lot for joining. I'll let Roma wrap up.
Thank you, Joss. Thank you for the session, and thank you everybody for your participation and enthusiasm on the Miro board. The next session we have is on 18th March, Introduction to Systems Thinking, which will introduce us to systems thinking module. But before that, if you're in the learning series and you want to clear any of your questions or have discussions, then we have a learning cohort happening next week, same place, same time, 4 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. UK time. And then if you'd like to look at the learning material and look at the learning series space, you could click on the link here and access it and register for the upcoming events. It is continuation of what we learned today, more in depth, in fact. For the next learning series session, we will talk about systems thinking, and you could access the material here by clicking on the link on this button on top. I would also like to hear your feedback. What do you think? How was the session today between 0 and 10? 10 being it was extremely relevant and engaging. Pick one of the dots in the panel and place it on the horizontal bar. Let us know what you think. And if you have any additional comments, please leave us a note here on the sticky notes. We take your feedback really seriously and work on it. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining and have a great rest of the day.
So thanks for that, Roma. Thank you, everyone. Do appreciate your feedback, and we'll share the video back into the group afterwards in case you missed anything. Look forward to seeing you next week or the week after, whenever you're able to make it.